throughout history, bread-making skills have been a common denominator of all peoples. In the mass production nature of this century, we may feel pretty far removed from that fact. But there are still a lot of home bread bakers who are discovering the individual creativity of the process. Master a few basic techniques and you'll be able to tackle any of these variations. The rewards of such an enterprise are, well, indescribable. We'll just show you how to do it, but you'll only discover what I mean by trying it yourself.
Right. We're going to cover 3 kinds of basic breads: yeast bread and rolls, biscuits, and muffins. Let's start with yeast dough. We're using a recipe that has been adapted for refrigeration. This means that the dough can be left in the refrigerator to rise. It can also rise in the conventional manner, in a warm place until doubled in bulk. Read your recipe carefully for ingredients and directions. Milk or water may be used in bread recipes. This recipe calls for dry milk, which may be added with the dry ingredients. So, we begin by using 2 cups of water at 105 to 115 degrees. If you don't have a thermometer, test a few drops on your wrist. It should feel comfortably warm, not hot. Now, add the dry yeast to the water and dissolve. Yeast is actually a microscopic living plant in the dormant stage. It needs food, heat, and moisture to grow. However, temperatures in excess of 140 degrees can destroy it. Also, never waste good ingredients on yeast which is past the expiration date on the package. It will have lost its power to make the bread rise. The food that yeast grows on is sugar, which is added when the yeast is dissolved. Add the salt. It acts like a time-release capsule to control the growth of the yeast and contributes flavor. Add the oil, the eggs, and the dry milk. Mix all these ingredients thoroughly. You can use an electric mixer at this point, or do the next few steps by hand.
Add half the flour, in this case about 3 to 4 cups. We're using an all-purpose enriched flour. It is not necessary to sift and measure the flour exactly for yeast breads because the amount required will vary with weather conditions. Wheat flour has a protein in it called gluten. When mixed with the liquids, the gluten forms the elastic network that stretches during the rising of the dough. Gluten forms tiny pockets that hold the carbon dioxide gas produced by the yeast as it ferments. The beating action helps develop the gluten. Now just add the rest of the flour 1 cup at a time. You'll have to stop using the mixer when the motor slows down and the dough begins to climb up the beaters. Just keep adding flour and combining until a soft ball forms and very little clings to the sides.
Now for the fun part. This is where you can really get into it. Literally. Notice that the dough is a sticky, lumpy mass. It's time to knead it. Kneading is the process of manipulating dough. It is unique to bread making. The technique of kneading has a natural rhythm to it. Fold the opposite side toward you, push firmly but lightly away from you with the heels of your hands. Turn 1/4 turn, pushing flour under the dough until it no longer sticks to the counter and your hands. Fold, push, turn. Fold, push, turn. Kneading incorporates air into the dough, and pushing and stretching develops the gluten. Continue for 5 to 10 minutes until the ball of dough begins holding a shape of its own, becomes more elastic, It springs back by itself. You can begin seeing stretch marks on the dough and tiny air pockets. It will start feeling as if it has personality now, a life of its own as it pushes back when you push. The dough should feel soft, smooth, and satiny. You'll see tiny blisters just under the surface. It's ready to rise.
Place the dough in a lightly greased bowl, turning it over once to grease the top. This prevents a dry crust forming which impedes the rising. Cover with plastic wrap or a damp towel. Now it should rise in a warm place, about 85 degrees. Inside a gas oven or on top of the refrigerator are sometimes warm enough. Or put steaming hot water from the faucet in a cake pan. Set it in the oven and put the bowl on a rack above it. Leave the oven off. Don't worry about the condensation forming inside the oven. It should take about an hour for the bread to double in size. Or if it is indicated on your recipe, you could put the dough in the refrigerator and let it rise overnight. When the dough has doubled and is ready for the next stage, it will retain the indent of your finger. Then punch the dough down to release the gas bubbles.
Look at the extent of the gluten network now. Since this recipe makes 2 loaves, at this point, the dough can be divided and left to rest for 5 to 10 minutes for easier handling. Then it's ready for shaping.
Now to form a loaf of bread, roll out the dough on a lightly floured surface. You can hear the air bubbles crackle as the gas is forced out. If the bubbles were left in, there would be large holes in the bread. Shape it into a rectangle, the width of which is slightly less than the length of the pan. Roll the short side toward you. Seal the edge as you go by pinching. To seal the ends, punch them down and tuck them under. Then put the loaf seam side down into the lightly greased loaf pan. Non-stick coated pans do not require greasing. Also, lightly oil the top of the loaf. Let it rise in a warm place until doubled. It will take slightly less time than the first rising. Dough that over-rises becomes coarse and crumbly and may collapse while baking because the gluten has been overstretched.
With the other half of the dough, we'll show you how to make rolls. For twist rolls, the dough should be cut in 1/2 inch strips and rolled to smooth the edges. Pick it up by the ends and twist into a knot.
Crescent rolls are made by cutting wedge shapes from a 12-inch circle of dough brushed with melted butter. Cut in quarters, then cut each quarter into thirds. Roll them up from the large end. Place with the center point down on a greased sheet. Bend into crescent shapes.
Cloverleaf rolls are simple. Just make 3 balls and place seam down in greased muffin cups. If you want a glossy finish, brush the top with beaten egg. We'll do that after they've risen.
Cinnamon rolls require a filling. This is 2 tablespoons margarine, 2 tablespoons sugar, and 1 teaspoon cinnamon. Roll out the dough into a rectangular shape, Spread the topping, leaving 1/2 inch at the edge for sealing. Then roll it lengthwise, pinching the seam to make it stick. Cut into slices about 1 inch thick and place cut side up on a well-greased baking sheet. Sweet rolls are baked at a lower temperature than other rolls because the sugar filling burns at higher temperatures. Then let the rolls rise in a warm place until doubled. Use the finger indent test again to check whether the bread and rolls have risen enough. Bread should fill the corners of the pan and be above the edge of the pan. Bake in a preheated oven according to the temperature and time of your recipe. 25 degrees less if you are using glass cookware. The rolls bake for 12 to 15 minutes. When done, they should be lightly browned. Look how shiny the ones brushed with egg are. The heat of the oven makes the bread rise quickly during the first 5 to 10 minutes of baking. This rising is called oven spring. Then the gluten in the bread sets, and the growth of the yeast stops. Bake at 400 degrees for 30 to 40 minutes. When done, the loaf should have pulled away from the sides of the pan and sound hollow when tapped. Remove immediately from the pan so it won't get soggy, and let it cool on a rack in a draft-free place so the crust won't crack. If you want a softer crust, brush the top with butter. When cooled to touch, it will slice more easily. The texture should look even and the crumbs tender and moist.
That looks great.
Oh, it is. A couple of the rewards of bread making are the aroma of freshly baked bread and the tasting of it while it's still warm.
That is good.
What's next?
Biscuits. Biscuits are a quick bread. They're called quick because they're made with quick-acting leavening agents instead of yeast. Sift flour for biscuits because you need an accurate measurement. We're using a self-rising flour, which is an all-purpose flour with the correct proportions of salt and baking powder already added, a time saver for those who bake biscuits frequently. Shortening is what makes the biscuits tender, flaky, and moist. Pressing the shortening into the measuring cup forces out air bubbles so you have an accurate measure. Solid shortening is used because it's cut in with the dry ingredients. Keep cutting in until the lumps are all the size of small peas or crumbs. In this process, the flour is coated with shortening to prevent lumps forming when the liquid is added. The liquids must also be measured accurately. The only way to do that is by using an eye-level test. Now, pour in the milk and mix until it forms a soft dough which leaves the sides of the bowl. Put the ball of dough on a lightly floured surface and knead about 10 times. Again, kneading develops the gluten in the dough. Roll the dough out 1/2 inch thick, pressing lightly as you roll. This dough has some spring to it also. Try to cut as many biscuits as possible out of the dough the first time. Place on an ungreased baking sheet. If you want soft sides, place with biscuits touching. Separate them for crisp sides. Bake 10 to 12 minutes in a preheated 450-degree oven. Biscuit dough should be baked within 30 minutes. Otherwise, it overexpands and big air pockets form in it. The baking powder is the leavening or agent which causes the dough to expand. It acts twice, once when it's mixed with liquid and again when exposed to heat. The leavening produces gas, which causes the dough to double in size, the same way yeast dough expands. They're done. Just the right golden brown on the outside. They should break in half easily, and the inside should be an even, fluffy, layered texture with no air tunnels. And the only way to serve biscuits is hot, right out of the oven. My turn. Perfection. What are you making?
Muffins. Muffins are considered a quick bread also. They're made from a drop batter instead of a dough that retains its shape. A drop batter simply has a larger proportion of liquid to flour. In one bowl, mix flour, salt, baking powder, and sugar together. In a separate bowl, mix all the liquid ingredients together until well blended. Now notice the method of combining ingredients. The liquids are added to the dry ingredients. Mix just enough to moisten the dry ingredients. The batter should be slightly lumpy. If mixed until the batter is smooth, the muffins will become heavy and compact with long, narrow tunnels. A lumpy batter will make a tender muffin with a slightly rounded top and even texture throughout. Fill greased or non-stick coated muffin cups 2/3 full. Bake at 400 degrees for 20 minutes.
Looks like they pass.
Now you've seen the basics. And once you've mastered them, don't be afraid to try and experiment with all kinds of bread making. After all, the only thing you've got to lose is your hunger.
But be careful. Once you start, there's always one danger: overeating. But I think I'll sample one.
Watch out for oversampling.
I really needed that.
Oh, you crumb.